Hey guys. Welcome. Let's see, I see a chat. Hi Charity.
Hey Noah.
Does it feel like we got on and did this a week ago? That feels like 2 days ago.
Yeah, it's a week ago.
If you actually told me it was yesterday or last night, I think I'd believe it. Yeah.
Oh, there we go. There's better light.
I want to share. Oh, let me see. I'll go over here. Let me just put the invite up on Facebook right now real quick. I never know these days. I feel like, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago when social media was relatively simple and I did stuff like youth ministry or right when the church was starting out, felt like I had a good handle on that stuff, but now I don't know. Okay, let's see.
Oh my gosh, look at you. Hanging out by the pool. You had a resort, man.
Hey, Josh.
He's on mute.
Is that a virtual background or are you just living that large?
You're on mute, Josh. There you go.
Yeah, no, this is virtual. That'd be nice if that was my place. Hey, Charity.
Hi, Josh.
Hi, Josh.
Jacob can hear you too, and he says hi, and he likes the background. I'll try to, yeah. I didn't turn the camera.
Oh, hi, Uncle Josh.
So I see you've upped your real estate there, Josh.
He's doing an infomercial.
You look like you should be smoking a cigar or something.
Are you going to try to get us to like buy a timeshare or something? Just look in the back. Yeah.
That's on point. That's awesome. Oh, well, let's hop into it. I know people are, still hopping on and joining us. Hello, I think I saw Lynn and another person on here. Lynn, are you there?
Yep, I'm there.
Hey, which Lynn is this? Who do we got on the line here?
I'm Charity's friend.
Oh, okay, great, awesome, from last week.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, welcome again. Post this on Facebook here. Oh man, my computer is slowing down.
Excuse me.
Has your computer ever bogged down enough to where you're like typing and nothing happens, and then all of a sudden like a paragraph of your text appears?
No.
I might need a new computer.
Or you just need to clean it up.
Yeah, well, it probably is. I wiped it out, did a factory reset, and reinstalled everything, but that was probably like a year ago. I should probably do that again. Anyways, that's not why we're here. You know, want to talk about how.
Not today.
Not today. So let's talk about the Bible. Did you guys get that PDF or the I'm trying to say here, the PDF or the Word doc of that from last week that I tried to share, the Scriptura
Yeah.
one? Cool.
Yes.
I figured we could just keep going down that list and looking at things. Yeah, because I don't think we got halfway through it last time, and yeah, not even halfway probably. So maybe I thought we could just go from there, and I don't know, just continue this discussion about inspiration, the beginning of like written records for religion. These are good places to start. In systematic theology, they always pose the question to you: do you begin with, like when you talk about revelation, not the book of Revelations, revelation, inspiration, or whatever, for the scripture. Do you do anthropology first or theology first? And, all the super churchy people always say theology, and the kind of more, down to earth folks might say anthropology. It's probably a mix of the two. I don't know that there's a right answer to that. But I'm thinking of that as we are opening up the Bible here. And looking at the idea of like when revelation occurred, how did it occur? Or did it occur? Is that possible? Is it even something we can track with? So you guys, any thoughts from last week that you'd like to add? I didn't record the beginning, kind of personal intro stuff. And then I cut it off after kind of official-ish time, like an hour and a half maybe. But we talked for like quite a while after that, I think, too. So anything you guys want to talk about or add or didn't get to share last week that you're like, oh, you know what? I actually really wanted to talk about this before we delve into anything new.
Oh, there we are.
Oh.
I'm good. I think as things come up, it's just good to kind of hear what people have to say on it, and then it's fun to give your input after you kind of after everyone else played their hand, if you will, or everyone else kind of gives your thoughts. You can bounce off it here.
And I feel like, as we journey together, I'm going to try to provide regular oases for us to do that. Like if we're caravanning through, right? Hopefully the little spots where we can go, okay, wait, let's unpack, let's share, let's bring perspective, let's ask questions, will be short. They'll be close to one another. And I think maybe even just, I might try to end any kind of like, if we're working through this list of Bible verses or we're onto like a specific topic, I might even try to cap that for like, just leave 15 minutes open at the end there, Josh, because I think that's good what you're saying. That's why we're here. Okay, now that I'm looking at the document here, I'm trying to think where we got up to. Did we even go straight through this? The first mention of Israel, Yahweh. We talked a little bit about this, right? Edom, kind of going the separate ways of, Abraham.
No, I don't remember that.
All right. Well, let's just open that up. And if you guys just holler out at any point if something's wrong, you can't hear me, it's choppy. You don't have in front of you, any of those things. Just pause me, interrupt me, so we can get those taken care of. So yeah, let's open up that document that I was like maybe 2/3 of the way through OCD color coding before we started last week. That I'll probably inevitably do and give you guys a much prettier, cleaned up, updated version of that. And if we want, we can put something like that on Google Docs. So we just kind of all have access to it. And it's something we could also add to, as we go along. And we're kind of categorizing different parts of Scripture, maybe outside information or sources. There's no I hope you could tell from the Facebook invite, there's no agenda in terms of where we want to go reading the Bible. I don't care. I've got thoughts for days on all the stuff in the Bible. So days and days and days, and all of it is interesting to me. And I'm not trying to sound spiritual. Most things are interesting to me. I'm just an interested person in general. So where we go is kind of up to you all and how we navigate that and what we wind up looking at. So with 5 of us in here, I know Jamie is trying to join in. She's probably putting the kids to bed by herself right now. And Chris Bose was also going to be in here. But we'll see. It's just the 5 of us. So easier to navigate in terms of coming to a consensus about not the meaning of a scripture, but just kind of where we want to go from each point, each one of those little oases. So yeah, let's just open that up and start at the beginning here. I tried to just throw together some basic information about early Israel. And like I said, I got a lot of this stuff off of blueletterbible.com. I think that's Brian McLaren's website, where it's the Bible, and it's not broken up there's no verses inserted to this stuff. There's no little headings that tell you what to think before you actually go read the Bible. It's pretty good because it's shockingly hard to get a pure copy of the Bible. And what I mean by that is something that's not all divided up with brackets of what pericope comes next. So that's a Bible school term right there, pericope. I did not know that when I got to some of you guys already know that. When I got to seminary and they were talking about that in my first New Testament studies class, I'm like, what's a pericope? And so the teacher opened up the Bible and was like, well, you see where it's broken up by sections? Yeah, that's pericope. That's an editorial choice. That the editors of that Bible, they're all edited. A publishing house publishes the Bibles, and there's a lot of different publishing houses publishing a lot of different Bibles. That's an editor's choice to add those things. So how many of you guys are familiar with the Scofield Study Bible? John, a little bit?
A lot of it.
A lot of it. Okay, the palm of the head. Yeah. Josh, Charity, Lynn, are you guys familiar with the Scofield Study Bible?
No.
Okay, it's
I mean, a little bit. I know a little. I don't use it myself, but a lot of the pastors that I have heard preached used it.
Right.
And it's. I mean, I know a little bit about the history of Schofield. That's about it.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about that history? Whatever you know.
Sure. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think he was a lawyer that was, he had gotten a divorce. And he came up with basically was viewed as a newer, he popularized for sure, newer eschatology. And, amongst other things, he had commentary on the whole Bible. But this is even debatable in what I just said, because some would argue that it's not a newer, but just popularized eschatology that came through Schofield. But he had commentary on the whole Bible.
Right. Which is, Calvin did that. There's been a few people that have done that, but that's a pretty impressive undertaking. And this is, John, you might know, I'm not 100% on this, that it's the first. I'm 100% sure that it is at least one of the very first study Bibles kind of, thing, right? So,
other than what the rabbis put together in Midrash, I mean, that's all that study Bible is Midrash.
right, which is kind of like, wait, okay, if Jesus came to free us from the law, he probably really came to free us from the Midrash, which is like
and
a narrow interpretation.
getting into some of the interpretation, there are those who take Scofield's notes and put it on the level of Scripture, which is not. It's definitely from a slanted eschatological point of view, a dispensationalist point of view, and it's all through that. And so that's how it became popular, because he wrote that thing, I think, in the 1920s, if not earlier, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, early 1900s.
Early 1900s. And so that theological school of thought, i.e., Dallas Theological Seminary, Moody Bible Institute, and others have adopted that, and it's very, very popular even today. I mean, you got John Hagee writing a book every other week from the Scofield Study Bible.
Yeah, and it's like, so it's such a great example of why certain bad theologies or bad ideas, or even really just straight up categorically, scientifically, provably wrong interpretations of Scripture, why they still persist is because they're usually some of the first, and not the first as in the early church, but like this is the first of some of those thoughts, and it's in the first study Bible. This is at least Calvin's, his commentaries were published as commentaries, separate books, right? And there's nothing against commentaries. I've got tons of them. They're great. Scholars spend literally.
Book two, Noah, wasn't that series, The Fundamentals, in the late 19-teens, early 1920s, and the whole fundamentalist movement came out of that.
Yep. Yeah.
To quote unquote combat what they perceived as liberal theology of that day.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it's a day. It's as old as the debate is about God versus science, which predates Darwin by centuries, right? I mean, Galileo was 300 years before Darwin, right? This
Excommunicated.
Yeah, right. There's the old false dichotomy that we put up between religion and science, and it's usually fueled by both sides because they both have agendas and want to control both the academy and the church, and they're pretty rigidly dogmatic when it comes to those things. And I actually don't think the solution for that is to like marry the two. It's to just go, we got to find a completely third way that isn't resting on a power institution, because it's not like schools are evil things. I don't think churches are evil things either. It's just the power system will always control the narrative of the text. So they'll the publishing companies will always have these headers and whatnot up there, because those publishing companies have theological agendas that they are trying to get through. Brian McLaren's, he's super liberal theologian. Like, he's up there with Tony Jones and people way out on the left. He didn't used to be like that. He's moved radically more left as he's gotten older. But the Blue Letter Bible Project is there's no agenda in it. It's the Bible text without like telling you what to think about it, which I think is great. So yeah, the Scofield Study Bible comes out in 1908, and it is, yeah, it's like a bestseller, and it was not a widely held belief. Like none of the theological beliefs in it were widely held at all. They mainly came from one preacher in Ireland.
Darby.
Darby, that's right. They came from Darby. It was largely just his views, re-spun and populated out across the world, really, because it began in America, but quickly, sparked a lot of international attention and following, because it linked itself very early to like the missions movements of the
and you had people like evangelist Billy Sunday, who was over the top, and revivalism was huge back in that day.
Yeah, Billy Sunday, just for if anybody doesn't know, 1920s, he was really the first televangelist before there were TVs. 50 million Americans listened to him on the radio. 50 million. And just to put that in, other perspective, 10 years later, the 1930s, coming out of the Depression and everybody being angry with the government, there's a famous priest named Father Coughlin, Charles Coughlin. He's a Catholic priest who became a radio preacher and got, he had 20 million followers, right? He was a huge anti-Semite, and fueled it in America. Like, think about millions of people listen to this guy, not as like a crack job racist, but as an official spokesman for the Catholic Church on the radio. Usually these are like these early onset interpretations. This guy actually has a term for them. D.A. Carson, you might have heard of his name. He's like one of the most well-renowned NT scholars from the 20th century. This shows you how old the book is that I have it. It was $7.
First edition.
Yeah. So he goes through all the different fallacies that people bring out of Scripture. Like the whole book is about misinterpretations of the Bible. And he's not like a radically liberal person either. He's a pretty middle of the road, kind of what you probably would have called an evangelical scholar back in the day. I wouldn't put that evil on him today, though. Yeah, he has a word for these kind of base interpretations. They remind me of base technologies. Now we have iPads, but for 50 years, our computers were televisions set on top of typewriters, right? They didn't have to be like that. That's just what happened. Or, like the QWERTY keyboard. Scientifically proven not the most effective keyboard layout. Like you can't type as fast on it. There's different English keyboards that have been out. Some that were out around the time of QWERTY. This one got there first. It got on the typewriters. It got on, for Underwood and stuff. And you're sealed, you're locked in. I tell a lot of my history students, when we're talking about the Model T and the like super narrow wheels on those early cars, they're like wagon wheels, right? And the reason wagon wheels are so long and thin instead of wide and short like our car wheels is because they had to drive through mud. Always. There's like just mud everywhere, especially on the East Coast. It rains all the time. But as you move further west, it starts drying up. Just, precipitously, it gets drier. And then at some point, those mud tracks that get laid in January and February, they harden. And so there'd be signs up on the intersections like, careful which track you choose, you'll be in it for the next 9 miles. Because, the tracks are this deep. And I feel like scripture's interpretations of the Bible are like that. It's like, man, we had no choice in the track we were on when we started with the Bible. Most of us, most people are not. We come preloaded with something. And some of those tracks are, a little deep. Mine was a little deep. My parents were not super theologically, they didn't really care about much that way. But I definitely had tracks from the churches I grew up in or around. An atheist comes with a track that's probably deeper than mine, how they view the Bible. Because I didn't view it in a negative way, but I also didn't ever regard it like, oh, it's the holy word of God. If you drop the Bible on the floor, somebody's going to come by and whip you. No, that's ridiculous. And, somebody that's grown up in an atheistic household could actually have a similar approach to the Bible. But they could also come with tracks that are a little deeper, right? Like antagonism towards the Bible. Depending on which church or denomination or faith that we were brought up in, they're all different tracks. And the depth of those tracks varies quite a bit. And we didn't have a lot of choice in choosing them. We're just in there, we're going along, and it feels like, dude, there's no way to break out of this track. I am stuck in it. The walls are too big. The boundaries around what this is are too rigid. So I can't change tracks. Or if I can, it's, 8-9 miles down the road. And so we ride things out, but then, seasons change always. The Lord's good that way. Rains come back, they soften the ground, and suddenly what seemed super rigid and dogmatic is pliable. So, I think that's probably fair to say for all of us who are in the group tonight. We were in one track, and at some point we've gone, wait a minute, changing our view of, the Bible or a certain biblical story, or just even what we believe the Bible is, which of course is a really big one. So that was my long history teacherish way of saying we all come kind of preloaded with some stuff. The Scofield Study Bible preloads a lot, and they do a cardinal sin theologically by making a absolute claim while there are many more viable options, right? So if you say, look, salt is this chemical makeup, and that's why that's there on the chemistry table of elements. Okay, that is concrete. You can say definitively what it is. But to say, well, Jesus Christ will come after there's a great rapture, and this and that, it's like, well, and be like, and this is the only truth, is just academically dishonest. It's, because the person saying that knows that's not true. Why would I know that they know that? Because in order to even make a claim about something like that, you have to form an opinion against it. And to form an opinion against it means that you have to know something about it, right? That Arab people are attached to Muslims a lot of time, right? You might not even know that the Quran is written in Arabic, but you're making that assumption there, or that connection. Schofield lays down dispensationalist theology, which is just on a logical level, it's very strange and bizarre. And because it's put down in the Bible along the text, it is read as it's presented as the only interpretation. And then of course it's read as the only interpretation. And so, where pastors were trained in the 19th century, in training schools and seminaries and whatnot, now in the 20th century, you have a lot more people that are starting churches that are not educated. And I don't mean this is not like a condescending way at all. They're just not educated. They couldn't really interpret the Bible or give a coherent sermon if their back was against the wall. They can take what Schofield says, or anybody else for that matter, and then just preach it, And now today on the internet, we can just do that. We'll just download other people's sermons and preach those. Somebody else wrote them. I don't even have to think about it. I can just regurgitate somebody else's point. I can choose this track and choose to believe this without realizing that track is like not for 8 more miles. It's probably for the rest of your life. I have a theory that many people do that politically when they're young with no rhyme or reason almost. It's kind of more depending on who their peers are, or if they want to be like their parents or rebel against their parents. That's about it. And then you're identified with those things. And it just kind of goes on from there for the rest of your life. And you feel like, it reinforces it. You're in an echo chamber, and everybody that's outside of it is, crazy. So it makes dispensationalist theology look like the absolute only way. And if you question that, you're a heretic. The other big...
Noah?
Yeah.
Can you get a little bit closer to the mic, please?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Here,
Thank you.
Is that better?
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, yeah, you got it. So dispensationalist theology and making it, appear as a cardinal sin to question is I'd say one sin of the Scofield Bible. The second great, probably actually much bigger one in the scope of things is Zionism, which is, a belief in that Israel should have there should be a modern day state of Israel, that the Jewish people should have a homeland, and that this is a prerequisite for pre-tribulation, end of times theology, which is what dispensationalism is and says is the only thing you can believe. Therefore, bringing about the homeland for Israel is expediting the end times, and in really, really far extreme versions of Christianity, that looks like the Seventh-day Adventist, who started as an end times cult. And when their prophecies kept getting that one didn't come true. They just, Christ did return that day, but it was in our hearts. Now let's form a denomination. David Koresh, their cult was an offshoot of the Seventh-day Adventists. Where was I going with that? Why did I bring that up? Different denominations. You can have just young men, mostly. There are some ladies. Amy Semple McPherson, they just go out and they start churches, and they've got a manual now. They don't ever have to actually have thought through their own questions wrestling with the Bible. They can just go, I trust this, so therefore this is what I'll use. And why do most people trust those things? Well, the guy that handed it to them, they trust, right? Or that's what's endorsed by their church or their denomination. That's what was the first one, so that was the only one around for a while. And just like when we hop into a group politically, we want to fit in. We want group identity. So it's like, well, okay, some of that stuff over there is maybe even a little weird to me. I don't understand it yet. I'm okay with that. This group's okay with me. And then only speak to people's immediate concerns of the complete insanity everybody has been living through since the Industrial Revolution. That is mounting, it's been just a steady growth of craziness for that. So just speak to their immediate needs, and nobody's really going to have time to read the Bible or get into some of these deeper theological thoughts, and you'll be good. And more or less that was true a lot in the first half of the 20th century. But then you saw what happens with like the Scopes monkey trial, religion and science getting pitted against each other, feeling like, and then somewhere along the lines to, the church gets shammed into endorsing a political party, really, like, so all these complications come along the ways that limit the majority of Christians even ability of options to think about the Bible.
Yeah.
While at the same time, humans are asking deeper and deeper, harder questions, and people will read the Bible and go like, well, what does that mean? More than they were 150 years ago when they were just subsistence living in a factory. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, what I was going to say, I think part of the issue in interpretation is people don't pay attention to the literary genre of what is being written.
Yes.
I.e., Scofield Bible, they take cherry-pick verses out of apocalyptic literature, which is highly, highly symbolic, and they give it a literal meaning.
Yeah.
And so the interpretation is way off into, what I believe left field. So, it's important when we look at various portions of Scripture to understand what the literary genre is. And I believe that's what you're going to be getting into, as we progress in our talk.
Yeah.
Maybe not tonight, but, as we progress on this topic.
Well, yeah, no, you're absolutely right, John.
And also, with that in the early 20th century, with the Scofield Bible, there's a lot of Christians who believe in a literal dictation method of revelation.
Yes.
That every single word, God dictated it to the writers.
Even when Paul said, this is me, not the Lord.
Yeah.
Well, told him to write that. This is one of those things where I'm like, dude, no history books ever talk about this, but it's super important for American history. So I wrote up a section actually in the textbook I'm working on the Scofield Study Bible. I'll try to make it a PDF and send it to you guys. So it's not long, it's maybe a page or two. Because it's so foundational to so many of the way, Americans think. More Americans believe in heaven than hell, right? Like more Americans believe in heaven than they do that a God exists.
Believe in what? Can't hear you.
More Americans believe. Turn my mic in. More Americans believe that. More Americans believe in heaven than they do in God. Right. Let that
Interesting.
sink in for a minute.
Interesting.
Yeah. So this has so much to do with that kind of way of thinking. Hyper individualism, uneducation. Like this is an anti-intellectual fire right here that gets fueled more in the 1920s. Okay, I'm actually trying to write notes as we go because when I want to do this more often. and in the future. So I want to write down some of the notes of things we're talking about. That would be good. So there's
Hey, just while there's a pause here, like I said, I've listened to pastors who I have not read the Scofield Bible, but it's like we gained somebody, but to me, I want to make sure we're not making a straw man here, because it's not a priori that none of this is true. I mean, that's like a genetic fallacy, right? We have to.
right.
So why then this is not the case? If it is accepted by these seminaries that you mentioned, John, and it is, because even stuff like Zionism, to me, I wouldn't just discount it. I would want to, because there is arguments for it.
Yes.
So we would need to examine the evidence and then say either way. I think, though, where I would agree would be more to the point of, you're saying that this is the only acceptable view that is kind of pushed upon people, and they don't have it. Well, I get that there's a lot that people don't know and don't understand. And even if we had better hermeneutics, it doesn't mean we'd still come up with those same conclusions.
Yeah, no, and that's the tricky thing about it is like, well, how many wonderful sermons did people preach using a Scofield Study Bible that the Holy Spirit still inspired, right? Like, I believe that's probably in the millions. There's probably been a lot of bad sermons too. There's probably been more bad sermons than good sermons, but it's, like, who's to judge that? That's beyond my judgment or capacity. Our job is to, like, kind of with all things, right? Like, weed through it, keep the good, and to, like, excrete the bad, get rid of it. And so there's lots of stuff in there that you can take out of it. I would say the same way with, like, a modern study Bible, like the MacArthur Study Bible. He's got great information, great insight, right? There's great notes in there. There's also a lot of really, really, really narrow interpretations and specific theologies overlaid on the text. So we figured, Jamie, that's okay. We're just happy to have you in here. We figured you're putting kids to bed. And I think so many, so the 20th century spun out so many denominations, and so many were also very brand new at the 20th century, that something like the Scofield Study Bible coming out that was, like, wildly popular. It's the first American book that Oxford Press published. Just think about that for a second. And, Oxford publishes the Scofield Study Bible. It's probably why it also lends a heavy degree of, weight to it. People feel like, it's from Oxford, I could trust it. Schofield, without going into too much of the nitty-gritty, he was a charlatan. Like, he was actually, when he moved, he actually wasn't even divorced when he married another woman and was having a family with her. And he was just a character. He was a very different kind of character. Arthur Balfour is the third character. He is the early on, I think, becomes the prime minister, foreign minister for Britain. I believe he's their foreign minister during World War I, which is the Balfour Declaration.
Hey, Noah, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I don't think anyone can hear you right now.
Oh, man. Is this better?
Yeah, I think we lost you. I lost you the last, like, 40 seconds, but it might have just been me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you're good now, though.
Okay, good. Thank you for letting me know. So the Arthur Balfour writes this Balfour Declaration, and it's basically Britain saying that they're committed to making a Jewish homeland for international Jews to go to. And that's he was friends. Uh, how we doing?
It's still a little iffy.
Trucker. Ay, ay, ay. All right. How's that? No, it's still not working. What on earth? Okay, I'm back. Am I working now?
Yep.
All right, good. I'm going to get my coffee and then we'll restart. Okay. Because I have no game plan or agenda, I just want to make sure I'm not totally bunny trailing and you guys are with me and or interested in where I was heading with that train of thought. Maybe my internet's not working good.
I can hear you. It's working good.
Okay. Very good.
And I think you're on a good, you're trying to set up a lens or a framework for us to kind of look at and you know, the terms that you're kind of using as you approach the Bible. So no, I think that was a good train of thought that you were going on there. Good
Okay,
path.
cool. I shall continue then. I'm trying to print up the scripture notes so I can not have one less program open on my computer.
And I know they're kind of in the back there, but it looks like our mom actually and Bob has joined, and Bob has interesting perspectives on some of that too. So I don't know if he ever wants to join in, but he's and they disappear. But he has. I wish he was in there for the earlier portion because I think he would have some interesting things to kind of talk to Josh about and the way that he kind of views things. It was I think they missed that portion, but yeah, it was a good train of thought anyway.
I will. So I posted last week's. I think I'll post this week's again, like as well, just to open it up for one more week. And then after that, we'll just kind of stay with who's in here, and I'll maybe upload these to Google Drive or do a Facebook group or something to where I can post the recordings of what we're doing. If you want to share a reference, or, if you can't be with us one week and you want to, just catch up with where the discussion was at, I will do that. Okay, so the study Bible. If my computer was working a little bit better, I would pull up my own notes on this. So, fact check it. I'll probably be in the 90% accuracy. There ain't going to be 100% on this, but Arthur Balfour Declaration. It's a commitment to starting a Jewish homeland way before the Holocaust, way before World War II. So there's this open, we're going to do this. And there's a few different places they're looking at. It's not just in Palestine necessarily. They were considering Madagascar for some reason. So he makes this declaration. There's an international plan to create a Jewish state. And this is highly influenced on Schofield, who inflames the kind of immediacy Zion end times dispensationalism. And some people have looked at that and said they did that as a deal. Otherwise, Oxford, there's no way in hell they ever would have published this book. This guy's not a scholar. He doesn't work at a school. Nobody knows him. They don't publish American books. They never have. It's not the worst conspiracy theory I've ever heard. But I don't know that it's more than that. I just do know that connection's there. And so in addition to being the prime source for dispensationalism, out of which springs up, like John was saying, these roots of fundamentalism, like literalism, how we interpret the Bible. But Zionism as a modern, Zionism as a modern movement was started in the 1880s or 90s in Europe by Jews there. American Zionism is different than that. And here's another one of those weird statistics. And this is actually just from polling my class. More, at least in my class, I had more students believe that America is the new Israel than not. At AVC, most of those kids have never read the Bible, anything in it. Yet that idea that meets really well with the idea of American exceptionalism, which was there long before Zionism, right? The whole manifest destiny, we're unique in the world. It fits right along there. So different people have different reasons for Zionism, right? obviously Jewish people have a huge interest in it because they've been dispersed and they want a homeland. The Americans want it because it is, well, in certain theological circles, it's implying that we are the new Jerusalem and will be rewarded for helping usher in this state where Jerusalem is restored. We also, you're like, man, that seems ridiculous. Could the whole entire American foreign policy really be built on one guy's interpretation in a study Bible from 1908? In the Middle East, it does. That and oil, of course, but there's a reason why Israel's got a great military. It's because they're funded by us and trained by us, and their weapons, we sell them those weapons. We say it's a strategic base in the Middle East, which, yeah, I mean, sure it is. Any base you held over there would be a strategic base, right? Like, what about our bases in Saudi Arabia? And they're our allies as well. I don't know why they are. They're a horrible, horrible, destructive country that's really awful to their people. I don't know why they're our allies, but they are. We got air bases there. So Israel's an ally in the region, which is not just strategically for oil, but is also seen in terms of a holy cause, right? So kind of a modern day crusade, particularly after 9/11. This skyrocketed because, Islam wasn't so much an issue in America before then. It really crossed most people's paths, not like in Europe. In Europe, they've been feeling each other's tensions a lot longer and in much closer quarters. So this particular brand of American Zionism, yeah, it starts influencing all these different decisions. And of course, after the Holocaust, there's international sympathy for this. There's international desire to have a Jewish homeland. Like rightly so, as the world's seen the Nuremberg trials, they're going, oh, whatever we can do, let's avoid this from happening. The partitioning of Palestine and all that, whole different conversation. We can get into that at a different time. But this idea of Zionism, it has shaped American foreign policy and wars over it. Whether presidents and commanders realized it or not at the time, it's what's driven people, and it's what's driven a lot of the kind of rhetoric of a militancy towards Islam. That they're a militant religion and they're full of terrorists, and so American Zionism is now actually used as a weapon against Islamic nations, which most people, and I'm just gonna this is broad generalities, so this does not apply to all people, of course, but I've found that most people that view some version of dispensationalism and a literal end times that is imminent believe that all of the bad people of the world, i.e. Muslims being on the top of that list, will be, eviscerated. That's part of the deal. So think about that. Think about how many Americans hold those beliefs. And you can trace the threads all the way back there to Schofield. And to your point, Josh, it's not that everything in there is bad. And the frightening thing is, some of his end times prophecy stuff could totally be accurate. I don't know. You don't know. Some of that stuff could totally turn out to be true. And that would infuriate me because I don't, I do think he's a charlatan. And I don't say that about a lot of people.
Well, I mean, because I haven't read the Scofield Bible. So it's like really interesting for me to comment on it. But I feel like, as far as you can't avoid dispensationalism.
Right.
really, really prevalent in Christianity today. And so I think to say, you know, like if Hitler said it was raining and it was raining, it's still true.
Yeah.
Because whether his character is great or not.
I was just telling Jamie today, I was with one of my best friends. He's from the Midwest. I was with him yesterday. And he said, even a blind squirrel finds a nut now and then.
Well, and so to me, we take the arguments for the merit that behold, right? And so, and I know that's not the scope of what we're doing tonight, but and I don't, like John, and you have been in seminary and have examined maybe these things deeper, but to me, I do see some compelling arguments for some of these things, and so I'm not in a position to say I know 100% for sure. I'm not. There's some good arguments out there for many different views, but I wouldn't throw it all out and say there isn't arguments for some of these views. There's some strong ones. I think it's why people adhere to them. As well.
My general posture towards all of those is usually the theological nugget that starts that train of thought that becomes a school of thought that people adhere to,
right,
is usually good. And maybe even that's good a few steps down that person took. Inevitably, they wind up way too rigid. And so it's like, well, you could say predestination now, and that's a very rigid term for American Christians, most American Christians, one way or the other, when it's like, well, it's very clear that it's not clear in the Bible. Like it's intentionally vague and paradoxical. And I think that was kind of Paul's point. It's like, it's paradoxical. Stop trying to figure this out. God's going to come like a thief in the night.
I do want to be careful though with it could be a sort of a straw man to say that, like, if someone has those beliefs that they would think all Muslims are evil or something like that, or
right,
destruction. I'm not trying to say it's not even the most prevalent view, but I think people have the right to think through things themselves and kind of organize their thoughts in that way, right?
Sure. Yeah. No, that's good. That's totally good to point out. And one of the things I like about reading the Bible from different vantage points and just kind of looking at scriptures and all the different ways you could, chew them over and mold them, is that it helps me also realize how very individual everybody's faith is, regardless of what school you're in. Dude, even in cults, right? People had different degrees of like the cultishness, or like I totally believe the Mormon church is filled with lovely people who really do want to be good and serve God and are misled by a lot of the stuff in there. And this was a controversy early on in the church because when the first persecution broke out, some of the pastors had turned apostate, right? They'd renounced the faith so they wouldn't die, which totally sent the people in there, who were under them, spinning. Like they just didn't know what to do because they're like, this guy says he doesn't believe any of that now. I still believe that. What does that mean for me? It's not unlike, today seeing a tele-evangelist, right? Who somebody put a lot of stock in, maybe even came to Jesus through a message, maybe has gone on to develop a really deep relationship with Jesus and even got plugged into a local church. But man, that was the person that led them to Jesus in the first place. And that guy was doing blow and a couple of other guys in an airport bathroom.
Yeah.
Joshua Harris writes a book telling millions and millions of Americans that they're going to go to hell, basically, if they have sex before they're married. It's way more subtle than that. And I believe there was a lot of good intention there. But again, like, there is something to credentials. He had no business writing that book. And now he says that. He's like, I shouldn't have written that book. Like, I didn't know what I was talking. I'm not like a relationship expert, I'm not a sociologist, I'm not a psychologist. Like, I haven't done any of these things. And man, not only has it wrecked countless lives of people who went and got married and, made really bad choices out of that, but even his own life, right? Like, him and his wife are divorced.
Right. Now. So with Schofield, then is that a case where Schofield would be in the same case as Josh Harris, where his character may not have been always the best, but he produced it, or would it be a different case, like in Philippians?
I think it's different.
Some preach Christ out of selfish ambition. But I praise God that Christ is preached, even if their motives weren't right.
Yeah.
So there are cases where, despite, and I'm not promoting some of these cases that you said they're terrible, of course, and hypocritical and amongst other things. But sometimes, like you mentioned earlier, good comes out of it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I've never even read Scofield's things, man. I feel like I've been influenced by some of the teachings. So I want to
it's pervasive. I mean, it's one of the best-selling books of the 20th century. It's like, it permeated the church everywhere. So like, it reached all corners. Different churches responded differently to it. I'd say the same way, like, worship music, vineyardish worship music did to the church in the late, the 80s and 90s. It's like, that kind of affected all churches everywhere. Different churches responded differently to that,
Yeah, I was just throwing my thoughts out there with it, but I don't want to derail you from everything. We could talk about it, but I had a question about Zionism.
Yeah.
Because I thought at first you were talking about Israel becoming a nation again, but then there seemed to be some talking about America becoming Israel, which to me would almost be two different theological views. One kind of holding that, the second one kind of holding that view that we are the Israel of God, and so if you're a Christian, you're Israel. Whereas the first one saying, no, Israel's actually going to come back to the nation, their nation, and fulfill some of the things written like in the minor prophets and so on. So were they both being called Zionism, or am I missing something?
No, you're totally right. They definitely are both that. And I'm glad you said that, because I've found this to be true with almost everybody. Some people have very specific views of the end times or of Zionism and Israel and what that should be. And usually they can articulate them pretty well because it's like a point. But when you actually ask people to start putting fabric and flesh on those ideas, like, well, what does that mean? How would that look? What do you think is going to happen there? They have no idea at all. So I think this is one of those spots. What you were saying right before this, what were you saying right before this part?
Are you talking about Zionism?
Yeah, Zionism. What was your point right before I started talking?
Oh, I didn't want to derail you, but I was a little confused because it seemed like there was two different views being called Zionism in my mind, and that you were talking about, but referring to both as Zionism, but it could just be my understanding of it. But one of them was that Israel was going to become a nation again, as we'll call that one view, just to simplify it for right now. And then the second view would be that anyone who's really a Christian or even American would be a Zion, would be considered Zion. Maybe looking at some verses that call, like where Paul called the church the Israel of God and so on.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. So this is true of most any kind of terminology or ideas like this. There's tons of inconsistencies and incoherency between them. So though that is a logical conclusion to come to, that you and me can and go, well, wait a minute, there's one new Israel. Which one is it? Is it a physical Israel, or is it the spiritual Israel that Paul talks about in the New Testament? Maybe they overlap, right? Maybe it's both. I would look at that and say, well, I think there's a lot of different things that are getting talked about in the Bible at different points in different ways. And we always just assume they're the same thing too, right? Like you just assume the serpent at the end of the Revelation is the devil. Doesn't really say that, but we interpret it that way. So I see it as, if I just put it in really blunt terms, Americans are winners. So it doesn't really matter what the belief is. We're going to wind up on the winning side. So if we need to make a physical Israel, we'll do that, right? But if we're the spiritual Israel, then we're cool with that too, without ever considering the possibility that God maybe never wanted to make do a physical homeland. Like maybe that actually is not there, or maybe America's Babylon and not the new Israel, right? Like there's a lot of assumptions when we head into those things that allow people to kind of like overlap theological things that are not necessarily congruent with one another. So yeah, that's a good point. There's two. It's Israel as a nation, physical nation, and Israel as a spiritual state. So I think that so much of that kind of theology, Zionism in general, actually comes from a lack of biblical literacy, biblical fluency, because so many of the verses that get used for that are very clearly talking about Israel in a specific time, or they're very clearly allegories for something else. And there are plenty, did I freeze up again? There are plenty of places in the Bible where it is not clear, and it's super ambiguous that way, but yeah. Zionism. So, okay, let me go backwards then. Many churches could be started with the Scofield Bible. The base technology is there. It sets our track for where we're going. If we can't really untangle those webs until we identify what they are. So they're different things. Right? Like if you did grow up in this tradition of dispensationalism, Scofield Study Bible, kind of a pre-tribulation rapture, end times, like very specific end times thing, identifying those and actually not rejecting them, but diving super deep into them is kind of the only way to go. How can I read the Bible differently here now? Because when you get down into pretty much any theology that's super specific like that is going to fall apart. And that's where I think the tension of the mystery of God and us is. I don't think it's in the nature. We're clearly understanding nature very well. I think it's in the kind of play out of that. So Zionism, dispensationalism are deep tracks for Americans. And even if you were on a liberal side or an agnostic atheistic side, you're affected by dispensationalists because you think that is what all Americans are, because there's so many, dispensationalism is so widespread. Okay, I think I rounded the corner on that. That's definitely an Oasis pause talking time. I'm going to grab my copies I printed off. Maybe you guys just talk with each other about those thoughts, Schofield, different interpretations. Don't all talk at once.
I think you get in trouble anytime that you're using a lens to read the Bible that is not going back to, the original text and reading through that. Anytime you're using that, it's going to have mistakes. It's going to have fallacies, whether that's Schofield or any commentary you're using. It really is something that you have to kind of go back to the text, consider the culture, consider what's going on at the time, and, read through it that way. And I think that there can be loyalty a little bit to certain trains of thought and the way that we approach the scripture, because it's tied to the relationship and what that relationship might look like. I know, Josh, we've seen Scofield Bible. I think of I've seen that in Dad's office when we were kids, and I think Aaron has one too. It is something that kind of flown around the circle. I don't know, Mom. Have you ever read Scofield Bible? Is that something that you've married yourself with? You don't know how to meet yourself. I think anytime that you're using something that is coming through the lens of a person, that you have to be aware of that lens. And it doesn't mean that they're wrong, but you just have to be aware that you are using that lens to read the text.
Yeah, that's super good. And I feel like when you do that with each author of the Bible too, it helps you know what you're dealing with, right? When you're reading a letter from Paul, like, dude, this guy's kind of extreme and super, super intense. Like, everybody that met him thought that way. He was a difficult man. He was a really intense dude. So I can be pretty intense, right? So if you got an email from me, you would read it with a different tone than if you got it from your boss at work or your mom. So I think that's important all the way around, both the lens of the author of a specific kind of book, but also the authors of the Bible itself. I'm looking for this. I was definitely not planning at all on talking about Schofield or the Scofield Study Bible. But I'm glad we did, in the sense of, like, I think it's really important to talk about. I think it's a really easily overlooked thing for us in America. We tend to move right past that, probably because it's so well. I'm thinking of the Schofield Study Bible, like you said, being on people's bookshelves. And a lot of, like, this would be a common gift somebody would give somebody that went into seminary or graduated from seminary. It was a very common book. And so when it's just kind of around, it's like, well, eventually it's like, well, nobody reads that. So then there's like an extra gap in what that theology even is, right? At some point, Neoplatonists stopped really reading Plato, and they were just having their own conversation. At some point, people stopped reading the Scofield Study Bible. A lot of people did, but continued to just kind of talk about the ideas, and then more people write books on that. And so in the tech world, that's what you call spaghetti code, in my opinion. And it's one of the reasons why this is such a dominant text in our American thinking. Where is my section on this?
I don't know if someone asked me if I was a dispensationalist. I don't even know the answer to that. But but one thing I would say is, I remember when I was taking sociology, it's probably 2 decades ago, but they were talking about 2 different types of knowledge. And one type of knowledge was when someone already looked at the information and they were able to then come up with a theory. And the other was predictive in its knowledge. And so they found that to be not a pseudoscience, but an actual science of superior knowledge, because they could predict something before it happened. And is my understanding is that some of that has happened with the commentaries and so on. Even because if you argue that, like the Balfour Agreement, we'll give Jews, we'll give you some land, and because actually the Palestinians were given a similar agreement if they agreed to fight as well with England. England was dishing out some deals, but like even before that, there was commentators saying that this would Israel should be a nation again, or these biblical prophecies going to come to pass. So there's some credence to that argument.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I think that I just want to reemphasize, I don't think people are being, dishonest or using the Lord's name for dishonest gain. I do think that about Schofield, and I'll show you why, because I'll send you the little thing I wrote up on him. But even before him, right? Like Zionists, pro-Zion Israel as a state. Yeah, they were around before, but I don't think they're actually doing predictive knowledge. I think they're doing literalism and drawing just conclusions. That's been my experience with most literal interpretations of the Bible, usually, but especially when it comes to something that's so like multi-layered, like prophecy. So you'll find them by the boatload all around the internet, people that can explain the end times to you and tell you all the things about how it's going to happen. But they would be really hard pressed to tell you a damn thing that happened in Rome during the 1st century.
Right.
Right. Like, it's like, man, if you don't want to do that work, you shouldn't get to
yeah. I would guess I was talking about people from the last, like 100 years ago. And so that, that would say that Israel would have to be a nation again in order to fulfill the prophecies. In that sense, it was predictive because it was at that time, it wasn't likely that Israel would have been a nation.
Right.
Well, then, you have 1948 when Israel became a nation, and then you have people who write books, 88 Reasons Why God's going to Return in 1988.
Because it's a literal interpretation.
Because it's a literal interpretation. And getting back to the genre, what is prophecy? Is it a foretelling or is it a forthtelling? Foretelling would be like a fortune teller. This is going to happen. Forthtelling is, if you don't follow God's ways, man, you're in for a world of hurt.
I would say it's the second, but that doesn't preclude the first.
There's probably some overlap on that. I mean, but.
So if you guys remember on the survey that I did last week, I put the book of Daniel completely separate by itself when I was asking which parts of the Bible you'd read. And that's very intentional. It's a completely unique book in the Bible. And in terms of predictive prophecy, absolutely. But, I mean, should we go look at Nostradamus? Like that man.
What is your, what would you say about Nostradamus?
Well, I mean, he's predicted tons of, world events that have happened for the hundreds of years since he died.
Right. I think there's a little...
What's funny, Noah, is on your notes I have up Nehemiah 8:3 and 8. And if you really want to get a twisted view of Scripture, you can say Nehemiah predicted Watergate. For it says he read from it before the square, which is in front of the Watergate, from early in the morning to midday in the presence of men and women. So you can make the Scripture say anything.
That's a caricature of like what we're talking about there. Right?
Yeah.
Well, it'll be a generation. This is how many a generation is. Israel's a nation now. End of the world will be here.
So, I mean, there's certain things that obviously people could do that with, and then there's other things that are a little more specific than that. Even if you read the first chapter of Matthew, where it talks about out of Egypt he will come, out of the great light that's been hidden in darkness. We're talking about Capernaum, that he would come from that area. So there was, and then that he would come from Bethlehem, which the Jewish leaders of the day understood that, because when Herod was asked from the men of the East where he'd be born. So Matthew chapter 1 lists 3 prophecies about where the Messiah would be born, and it wasn't something that they didn't understand. They did understand it. That's why they were able to direct others. So yeah, I'm not trying to say there isn't, like I say, that sociological distinction I was talking about from I wish I could agree with people. Looking back at stuff is different than looking ahead and seeing it fulfilled. And I think that when you see that, you can make an argument that the Bible's done that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, hundreds of times. And I think that biblical prophecy, we can do a whole night on. And I believe views that probably will make everybody on both sides of the fence uncomfortable, because I just think about that stuff differently. But it's not a liberal view. Like, they ain't gonna feel comfortable with how I interpret that stuff. But I would say forthcoming knowledge, right, is not necessarily even something that has to be spiritually inspired, right? How do certain people make fortunes off the stock market? A couple people are lucky, right? But a lot of people they are watching not the stock indexes. They're watching like global food shortages and weather patterns and on and on and on. So they can tell, oh, this is not going to be good, or there's going to be a spike over here in this. I'm going to move my money around months in advance of that. Now, the senators who did that with the COVID stuff, as soon as they got the information, they were looking backwards and, doing that. The guys that saw something like that happening earlier, they already moved money around months before that, years in some cases. When artists start new trends, right? How do they do it? It's an intuition, but it's because they're students of art and culture. So they know what the rhythms are, they know the patterns. And so when Jesus, referring to a prophecy about himself, says, you can see the winds gathering in the west, right? Winds gathering in the west or east.
East.
It's the east. You can see the winds gathering in the east. You can see, the signs of the times, but you can't recognize the plain truth that's right in front of you. We can gather all kinds of things and we can make predictive things about the future. And like that saying, even a blind squirrel will find a nut sometimes. Something probably will be right. Somebody will probably get something right there. But things like the Left Behind book series, well, I think they probably were well-intended. I don't think have done anybody, they have not helped people spiritually. I don't believe, even people that say they do, I want to talk to them and talk about what they think helped them, because usually it's just getting a certainty about something or feeling like you're a winner and you're on the in crowd. And so when all this bad stuff happens, you'll win, you won't suffer, just like Americans, right? We don't suffer. We've never had a war here. We don't have pain. Our whole point in life is to avoid pain. We've gone to great lengths to make our lives pain-free as possible. I think that forthcoming knowledge is always there for those that want to see. And that's why people like the centurion could make bold declarations about who Jesus was, while even his own disciples and students couldn't, because he wasn't studying the Jewish scriptures and reading prophecies necessarily. He was studying how the world worked, right? He said, look, I'm a man of high authority and I know how this works. So he wasn't trying to get some religious thing going, right? He's like, if you're real, you just say it and this is how it works. if you're not, you're a quack. And I'm in the Roman army and I might come back and kill you, right? Like subtext. That's kind of always the assumption with the Roman army. They're really, really bad guys. And so he's a rare one, right? The text even talks about him being a rare one. And then Jesus says, I haven't found faith like this in all of Israel, right? Somebody that just actually believes he's believing my word, but also has an understanding of how things work. Not somebody who's just got their nose in a book and is trying to like memorize all the rules so that they're make God happy, right? Like somebody who's looking, they have eyes to see, I guess.
I think it's interesting too, because I don't know, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but people will see the framework, and because the framework has been passed down and taught so much that they feel like when you're challenging the framework or you're challenging a specific theological perspective on something that quite honestly within the church is disagreed upon, that people who are sitting next to each other, one person might be younger, they might believe in dispensationalism, someone else might believe in evolution, and no one considers that an issue of salvation. But because they've been taught these things or they've learned these things, they actually take it to a challenge of the scripture, even though it's really a challenge to the person who wrote the commentary, or a challenge to the lens that was being put on. But because they've associated that, they've connected, they want to kind of convolute those two things, and they get a little defensive on those things and want to protect those things, right? Because they think, oh, you're challenging the scripture, you're challenging God. When the truth is that it's really saying, look, this is the framework, this is the lens. If you agree with that framework, you agree with that lens, good for you, but know where it comes from. Understand where, the background on it. Understand who the person is, why that thought was there. This person was human that wrote this, that it was doing, maybe they had good intent, maybe they didn't. You can still take truth from somebody who doesn't have good intent. But even though, they have that, it doesn't mean that that they don't have something that is truthful for you to take from them. But you should still understand where it's coming from, and it's be able to make a distinction in your mind between what is coming from, the original text versus what is coming from these commentaries, and not feel threatened by that. To know there is a distinction, and like the centurion, to be able to say, oh, here's what you presented to me, and I'm just going to go off of that. It's not something that you have to take all or nothing. It's something that you can examine for yourself and should examine.
Yeah. No, I'm totally with you. And I would say that when you talk about a view of the Bible, people feel, if they hold that view, they feel personally attacked, which is sad. And sometimes that is true. And we go after each other personally. But often, like we can talk about, I don't know, I'm autistic, so it never makes sense to me. I'm like, I can talk about anything rationally without getting emotional about it. You start talking about my friends and family or something like that, yeah, we'll go outside. But like outside of that, I'm anything kind of intellectual, theological, I don't get emotional about, but that's because I don't believe that I've got everything right or figured out. So I'm assuming I've got some stuff I still need to get worked out. So then if somebody comes along and says, hey, consider this differently, I genuinely am open-minded. But I'm also feel like that because I have so many convictions and they're all now arrived at like by my own. When your conviction just comes because so-and-so said so, or your pastor said so, or whatever, you question that person's authority, you're questioning my faith now. Or if that person has a moral failing, you somehow feel like guilty or like you're involved in that. So like, I think theological differentiation between who we are as, and I don't want to make assumptions for everybody, but just as people, children of God. Yeah, so.
Yeah, I saw Lynn was kind of commenting on the side, and I'll mute my mic because I'm talking a lot. But I saw that she kind of mentioned as well that there's, people that she had that experience where, someone's having incorrect views, and there's so much division that can happen because people, they're putting forth these ideas that really is their identity politics, their identity theology, and this Christianity that they've built that does not resemble what was actually ever even written. And so, people are pushed away on these political issues or these scientific issues that really it's again, if you take that perspective and you take that theological view, that's fine, but you should just know where it comes from and realize that it is coming from humans who are trying to make sense of this text, but
Yeah.
as out, and then I'll mute myself because I'm talking.
No, this is good. I want the discussion. This is what we're
No, I think too, Noah, that at least, let me speak for myself, not generalize. The older that I've gotten, the more open-minded I've become.
That is good.
And so we've had some discussions about, just deconstructing things that we believed in the scripture, just tearing it all down, getting rid of assumptions, and then re-entering from an open framework rather than a closed framework.
Yeah.
And, for me, it's been extremely helpful. And I'm looking at things more through a theological lens, which, does have some presuppositions, of course, but it's more open rather than closed.
Yeah. Which I think is just intellectually is what we all need. We need intellectual humility when we come to texts in general. Like, don't go assuming you know what Dostoevsky's all about. Just go read him. Like, just clear the platter, right? Take an aperitif and approach. And then, of course, if you love it, you get into it and you study it. You want to study and, rush at the time, which is what we're doing with the Bible here. And just so you guys know, I didn't even learn about the Scofield Study Bible in seminary. Like, I didn't even learn about it really in American church history. Briefly, I think it was mentioned, but I found out the depths of it when I was just working on my own stuff for my project and was like, oh my gosh, look how foundational this is. So that's not even something that I wouldn't call Fuller a liberal school. They're definitely more progressive than most seminaries, but they're not aligned with liberal, Union seminary or something like that. So, I didn't even learn about it there. Nobody talked about it there. I think most of the pastors that leave there wouldn't know what it is really one way or the other outside of it's a conservative, study Bible. Not really realizing, man, this is all over our thinking, right? Nobody writes the late great Planet Earth or the Left Behind series without the Scofield Study Bible being published first.
Right.
It wouldn't exist.
And then it's baby brother, the Ryrie Study Bible.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that was my first Bible ever.
Yeah. Really?
Yep.
Study Bible. I think my first real Bible was a Life Application Bible. So it's a little bit better. It was just more like, hey, how can you be a better spiritual person from reading this text? Kind of text. So mostly harmless or helpful.
Right.
Not tons of theological things in there, which because we are susceptible people, all of us. Yeah, the King James Version of the Bible. So
Red Letter Edition.
This book, the How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth, I think he has a whole chapter on the King James Version. He has a whole chapter on translations for sure, but a large section on the King James Version and why it's categorically not a great version of the Bible to read. It's not, it's very much riddled with errors, and we've got much better translations off of recent manuscripts, also off of Jewish, like Hebrew and Greek manuscripts, which a lot of the King James Version was written off the Latin stuff too. So, you know, take it for what it is. Pulled out these notes to go over this stuff with you guys. And we didn't even get to it. We'll have plenty of stuff to talk about next week, I guess. The inspiration. Maybe I'll just close with this. Inspiration. That's going to be a huge topic that we talk about because it's kind of what we want to know. Like, is there inspiration here? If so, how does that work? Where is it? Are some texts more inspired than others? Are some texts in the Bible more authoritative than others? Right? Those are the Textus Receptus. Yes. The Loch Ness Monster. When we think about somebody like Nostradamus, right, who, I don't know, I think is kind of just a super weird dude. I actually haven't read much about him, but he definitely predicted things that were going to take place in the future. But if you want to know, like, that's just happened throughout history, outside of the history of Israel or American traditions of faith and prophecy. Like, that stuff has happened, right? We also have plenty of times in history where you get really, really, really specific things, like Joan of Arc, right? Where you're like, how'd that happen again? And then they burned her as a witch at the end, right? Like, what crazy story that is very unlikely to take place, that even theologically you'd go, well, why would God want you to, like, keep the British out? Those are kind of those meta questions that I'm like, I don't think we are nearly ready to start even asking those ones. It's more just to look at and go, okay, there's some specific prophecy and visions and dreams. But then there's also the general, like, artist prophet, right? The artist exile. I would say hands down, Leo Tolstoy is a prophet. He prophesied so much about the kingdom of God, what Russia's future was going to be like. He was exiled, right? Like, he was disgraced from his country because of it. That's usually, like, prophets are usually talking to their own people. It's almost always bad news, and they're usually rejected. So in that case, I'm like, dude, Tolstoy, yes, absolutely. Sometimes their message is a message of hope, but that's always to oppressed people, right? Mm-hmm. Like, those messages of hope and a new Zion and all that, they weren't written to Israelites when they were all sitting around in Jerusalem drinking wine. They're written to people who are in, exile or going into exile immediately. So good news does come, but it's, so I just say, as Americans reading the Bible, we should not be expecting that the good news is for us. just from the history of the way prophecy works. And when we're talking about inspiration, then we look at some of these people and go, okay, well, they definitely seemed inspired. And some people talk about visions from God that were not, in the church necessarily, but shaped the course of history. And then even modern day artists who are doing similar things. Me and Jamie were just talking about this morning, saying pretty much all churches these days, most of them at least, want to say, hey, they want to be multi-ethnic churches because those are the fastest growing churches in America. That is 100% true. And that's been talked about at conferences for over a decade now. you got to get the Hispanics, you got to get the blacks, you got to get, like, those are the fastest growing churches. Oh my God. Okay. So, I got sidetracked with that. What was I saying right before that? Does anybody remember?
I don't know, but my Spanish major thinks that's funny. He's
Yeah,
like,
I
what's
mean,
going on?
It's
At
like
my
tokenism.
church,
Right?
yeah, I forget what point you were going on about, but yeah, on that point, like at my church, there are times when the pastors will say, "It's so good to see so many different types of people in this congregation," and just it doesn't matter how they say it, it is so awkward and so weird, and it's just, like, I don't care who's in the congregation, but when they point it out, it just makes it weird to me. I feel.
Yeah, it totally is. It feels like tokenism. It feels like, I'm not racist. I got a black friend who there's not even probably their real friend. Churches do that. And
Multi-ethnic ministry is messy.
yeah.
It is messy.
Living's messy, right? Like,
Believe me.
LA is more difficult to live in because of our multi-ethnicity. If I went up and lived in Boise, Idaho, pretty smooth sailing for me. I'm a white guy in my mid-30s. Life's good up there, right? Everybody looks like me. There's just a land of white people. It's also not the most creative spot in the country, right? There's not lots of new artists coming out of there, new art, new like, and it's also one of the parts of the country that's growing increasingly more racist, and that white people are fleeing to get away from people that make them feel uncomfortable. So, yeah, me and Jamie were having a discussion this morning. That's where I was going with this. It wasn't about church growth. Oh my gosh. We might need to move the time a little earlier because my brain's a little floppy right now. Gosh, dang it. This is going to kill me if I can't remember it right at the end here. I lost it. I lost my train of thought. That's me, though.
That's okay.
Lots of bug trails.
Is it related somehow to having multi-ethnic, how the scripture isn't just for one group and one section of the population, but is for everyone, and what we do is we tend to layer, whatever we think that should be on top of it. And so is that kind of the train of thought you were going on, or something along those lines? I don't know.
We're talking about prophets.
Oh, yes, prophets, yes. And Tolstoy and how, he's kicked out of Russia, that's right.
Yes.
And modern day prophets like Dr. King.
That's what I was trying to say. Most, me and Jamie were talking this morning, most churches want to identify as not only multi-ethnic, but like, we champion civil rights for people. Where were they in the 60s? Right? A lot of churches were protesting. They were mostly black churches. There were quite a few interracial churches, though, and even some all-white churches that went out and protested, in different parts of the country, for sure. But the majority of churches were not only neutral, they were actively against it. And that strand of dispensationalism leads straight to Jerry Falwell, Liberty University, being founded, and kind of that divide that's going on there. And so I was saying, I'm really glad that 6 years ago, we canceled our Sunday worship plans and just sat around and did like an open forum discussion on police shootings and Black Lives Matter and what was going on there. I'm really glad that I told our congregation 3 or 4 years ago, like, we are for the immigrant. We are all immigrants here. If you got any problem with any kind of immigrant, this is probably not the church for you. Now, we lost people both times, but I feel like it's very clear for me to see in line with the Bible, where biblical values are, irregardless of culture, things like justice, right? Particularly for the poor, the widow, the orphan, like on and on and on. But it's also really, I can see very clearly trends in culture and patterns in history because I study it so much. And I know now, just from studying heroes and villains, the regressive backwards approach to anything never winds up on the good side of history.
Never winds up what?
On the good side of history.
Oh, right.
It just never does. It's, you know, I mean, conservatives now are very different than conservatives 200 years ago. Those conservatives wanted to bring back the monarchy. There's not a lot of people suggesting that anymore. Well, eventually, everybody agreed, no, they were wrong on that issue, and let's just move on now. Regressive approaches to the Bible and approaches that begin and end with literalism, I feel like, are that kind of danger of limiting what is actually being said there, limiting the scope of what's being said, because Revelation is a much better book than an end times timeline. Like, it's an amazing book, but hardly none of it for the end time stuff. It's so misread and misunderstood. So, yeah.
The Book of Hope.
Oh, we also lost people when I said Christianity is not equal to or synonymous with American nationalism. In fact, it stands in stark opposition to.
I agree with that so much.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah.
We got a thumbs up back there.
I was gonna make a comment, and then he's like, "Yeah, that's so true."
Right on. Yeah. And not just American nationalism, all nationalism.
Yep.
Like, God's not happy that that Jewish people have a homeland and they're super nationalistic and prideful and like firing on people randomly across fences and building up missiles. It's like, I don't think the Lord delights in that. He sure as hell didn't delight in it 3,000 years ago when you guys were doing that.
No, and I think, I don't know if it's a dispensationalist view, but that like Israel is not living for God. I mean, I think only 10% are even religious right now in the country. And
oh, right. Right.
Looking at a country that largely rejects God, but that too is, I think, talked about in the Minor Prophets, that they will then, there's even that verse in is it Zephaniah or Zechariah where it says they will look upon him who they have scarred.
Yeah, what?
John, were you gonna help me with the verse?
Look on them who they have pierced. Is that what you're
Yeah.
getting?
Yeah, I mean, where did this happen? This happened in the house of my friends, and then they will weep. But it talks about them. It talks about a returning. So.
Yeah, and you know what? I always like to point out to literalists, and when I say that, please don't assume that I don't take things in the Bible literally. I actually probably take more things in the Bible literally than literalists do. Literalism is usually very incoherent because when you take all the things in the Bible literally, they're at cross purposes a lot of times. And with that, you can just point out like, with the verse that you were just referencing. What were you just referencing, Josh? Which verse?
I can't remember if it's Zephaniah or Zechariah.
One of those.
I think it's Zechariah, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
but I think your point might be that there's another way to interpret that verse. Is that maybe where you were going with that?
Oh, no, I remember what I was trying to say. This is what I like to point out to literalists about the end times. They're like, well, within a generation of Israel becoming a nation, the Lord will return. Yeah. In what world would Jewish people think they have a homeland without a temple?
Without a what? I'm sorry.
A temple.
Oh, right.
Right? Like, there's no Jewish homeland. The Jews don't have a homeland in a religious sense. They physically occupy a space, but it's not like spiritually cohesive in the slightest bit, right? It's like the most contentious area in the world, which I see as a very literal interpretation of a lot of biblical prophecies. Like,
Right.
there's a reason why Israel's at the crossroads of Africa, Asia, and Europe.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. They will look on him whom they have pierced. So it's not saying that there's not gonna be a literal physical temple, because I actually don't think that's the point, and I don't think God cares about rebuilding a physical temple. I think the Jewish people will, and I think nationalism might lead to, if war breaks out, they're gonna rip the dome of the mosque down like that. It'll, it'll be plan one. They'll build a temple there. I sure as hell hope that doesn't happen, because that's going to mean millions of people die. And it could involve nuclear weapons. That's what's at stake in Israel. It's not like, well, let's push that along faster so we can get to heaven quicker and the rapture will happen. It's like, no, we don't know what we're doing. If you think I don't think that was what the Bible was even trying to say. And we're like making bad situations way worse.
Oh my gosh. You know what?
I do find
when national policy, foreign policy is based on dispensational theology, it's going sideways real quick. Real quick.
Yeah.
it is I look at it and I see arguments for it though. Like when I look at is it Ezekiel 38 where it talks about Mog, and when you go to Genesis 10, the table of nations, it gives you a reference to where each of the people went. Right. And so like it talks about, if I were to translate it, what we know of these countries would be Russia, and actually is it Russia and Turkey making an alliance, and was it Iran, and then coming down. This is not Armageddon. This is just a battle that's going to happen. But it says Saudi Arabia will protest against the attack of Israel. And I'm not saying that is even going to happen like that, but it's like today geopolitically, it is aligned up like that.
So here's what I mean about front loading things. There are no nation states when the Bible is written. The concept of a country like Russia or America would be inconceivable to people at the time. Nobody would be writing in terms about nation states, right? And wars don't look like helicopters and airplanes and satellites. It's hordes of barbarians coming over the hills to kill you, which happened a whole bunch of times to Israel, right? Like even since the time of Christ, it has happened to Israel again and again, right? Oh, good, look, the Mongols are here. It's people from the north.
Sure.
And that's also to assume that like the people that were living in some place, in the north are even people groups that exist anymore, right? Because there are no more Moabites, right? There's no more Magites.
No, you're right. But see, so the Moab, a lot of those, I don't, maybe I'm misunderstanding the point. But some of the people groups or the geography where they went is where it's referring to. But what was the point about there being no more, like, because if there's no more Philistines either, right? I mean, I don't get what the.
Well, okay, so you're familiar with the first, that the Lord, pays out the curse to the son of the father 10 generations or 100 generations, right? But we always look at the other part that he blesses those his followers to 1,000 generations, so that we should always see the blessing totally overruling the judgment part of the Bible across the board everywhere. God's point isn't to judge, it's to redeem. So people that have been judged, and all people get judged eventually, but even as people groups, right? Germany got judged because they did some messed up shit, man, like some really bad stuff, and they got judged and they're still paying for it. And mentally, those people
Well, so interesting about that, because
what's up?
Interesting about that, because if what I'm talking about happens, if these groups do, it's not to speak bad of governments or even people groups necessarily, because like if you look at like the percentage of Christians, like even in Russia today, which was communist at one time, they have a high respect. So I'm not, like I'm not trying to say that a people group would be wrong, just because there's some.
No. I knew that. I was actually just suggesting that a people group might not exist anymore. So that the Rus people were not the Magog people that would be part of the punishment to Israel, right? Like that some of these things definitely took place. In fact,
So I think what you're saying, what you might be saying is that because like this prophecy might have already happened in Ezekiel's time, or shortly after Ezekiel's time.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily way into the future, but I don't know. I mean, was like Magog even used in? It seems to me like they're referencing an older. Like I don't think Magog was even a people group in Ezekiel's time. I mean, I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I do know that like
an older reference going back to Genesis 10. But I could be wrong. I don't really know.
That's definitely something worth looking up, I think, because I'd like to know that, and I think we could talk about that because cross-cultural references as well help us identify which people groups are which, because obviously different people call different people groups different things. It's not nearly as uniform as it is today.
But what I wanted to say, Noah, is even though I could say that, that could be true. I mean, this could have already happened. This could have happened shortly after the time of Ezekiel. But that wasn't, I guess, my point. That would be more of a counter to my point. But my point I think I was trying to make was that how well things are geopolitically currently aligned to that view that seemed to be written a while back ago. So in that sense, it gives it seems to reinforce it, whether it's false or true. It seems to reinforce it.
Yeah. So I 100% believe that biblical prophecies are like at least a 3-layer cake. So there's an immediate context that is the point to the people right now, right? Otherwise, there's no point in writing the book. Writing was so rare. People were not writing down their thoughts for the future. If somebody might open them up one day, like it meant something to the people that it was being addressed to, right? And you see that all over Jeremiah. Jeremiah then goes back and forth talking about, Baruch went and read this thing and the people got mad. It's like, there's like a whole drama in the book about delivering it to those people. Then I believe it has an immediate prophetic context. And that might be within a few years, that might be within a few hundred years, right? And then I believe there's a bottom piece to the cake that God always sets, he likes setting stuff up in all kinds of, like you were talking about, chiastic ways, where I think all of these things will become true. We won't know all of them. And it's very clear in scripture that we're not to even waste our time trying to figure them out. Like Jesus makes clear instruction, don't worry about this. Just tell us to pay attention, which of course we are to do. So I believe that all of those prophecies have another chapter to them, right? Like there's another layer coming, but they could look so different. I think just because I study history so much, I know that people have interpreted these texts to their own situation, their own geopolitical setting in the world at the time for 2,000 years. Different groups always have. And like the way our world is changing so quickly, we don't know that doesn't mean that Jerusalem will be buried, 60 feet underwater from the sea levels rising so high, and that the North literally means Antarctica, or the Arctic Circle, because that's where some of the last landmass on Earth is. Like, we don't know that. That could be what the Bible means by that. Like, there's so many things, so many different possibilities that we don't consider because we're scanning them with our lens for right now and what would fit in there. I think a much safer way to do it is to just scan backwards, right? Like, if you scan backwards and go, well, where could these things have actually already happened in history? Like, the desecration that it causes, or the abomination that causes desolation. Is that right? Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Like, that clearly happened when Antiochus slaughtered pigs on the altar of the temple, right?
But Jesus also talks about it in Matthew again.
Yes, right? And so...
Yeah, 70 AD.
Yeah, so like...
That's one view, John.
Yeah, didn't that happen again in 70 AD with the destruction of the temple? Just like Jesus prophesied spiritually and physically, right? He meant it both. They're both different things. They were both going to happen. He was going to destroy both of them. So just like that, I think that the desolation that occurs, I mean, can you get any worse than Hitler if you're a Jewish person in all of human history? Antiochus didn't do anything compared to him, nothing. And he set himself up as an idol, burned Bibles, destroyed Jewish everything. Boy, if we don't think if the Bible couldn't have predicted some stuff about World War II, the most important event that's ever happened in world history, like on a global, scale. I don't mean Jesus, I just mean out of human things. What's the prophecy worth, right? Like, if it's not worth anything, it's got to be in there somewhere. Some of these events are too catastrophic or too large or magnificent for Scripture to not deal with it if it's going to be dealing with future events.
I get the reasoning behind that, but I don't think we have. How do I say this? I don't think we can determine what will be revealed like that. I get the reasoning and I would agree with you. I mean, the Jewish people have suffered so much historically, in every country really since medieval times and so on, and even before that, even with pharaohs killing the firstborns in the times of Moses. But that Holocaust was awful, no doubt.
Yeah.
I think we have to be careful with prophecy, because when we think of prophecy, a lot of, when you're looking back, you can take things and make them fit, that you can say, oh, this is prophetic, and kind of label that on there. Not saying that there's not things that have been foretold, but you can put those labels back on there and it's easy to fit. And then when you're looking into the future, again, people can use that to misinterpret. So I think it's one of those areas that you have to be very careful with. And when you're reading a text, before going forward and saying, well, this is for sure this thing, you better make sure you have the historical context, right? You better make sure that you understand what was being said in that time frame, so that you can find what was being said to those people and then maybe try to learn something from that, instead of trying to force what's happening now into what was talked about back then. So I think we have to be really careful of that. And I just know for me personally, I get kind of concerned when people are only living in prophecy, right? When they're only focused on that. And from my experience, it tends to be for a couple of reasons that they're doing that, and it's usually not a good reason that they're focused on that. It's a big red flag for me when someone's only living in that space. That's the only space you're living in.
Right, because it's way easier to live in that and fear and looking out for yourself than it is not thinking about yourself and serving other people and loving your neighbor. And that's way harder to do. It's way harder to do. The kind of apocalyptic, I'm going to be of the saved chosen ones, is not, that's not black and white in the Bible. And it feeds into our desire and our worldview paradigm. So we should always be leery of that and always question that, because the Bible is super clear that while Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Haggai, that while they're prophesying, there are more prophets in Israel prophesying the opposite thing and saying, good news, this has already happened. So, Charity, that's kind of like, that's one of the first things I learned at seminary was you have to understand what's being said to the people first. It's like somebody that has the whole timeline of Revelation mapped out without ever knowing what was even happening in the first century.
Exactly.
Yeah, it had to make sense to the first hearers.
Right.
First.
And I think,
Well said, Charity.
I'm really excited to get into the book of Daniel. It's one of my favorite books of the Bible, and it's so weird.
I would love for you to, I think is it 12 or 11? There's one chapter that's all history, and that chapter seems to throw me off. I think it's talking about like when Alexander the Great dies and the kingdom's divided into the the four parts, but Ptolemy takes the southern. It appears to me to be talking about that, but I'm not really sure. So I would love your take on that chapter.
I'm looking forward to talking about that because it's a fun.
But that would be a great example of predictive text if you hold that Daniel was written by Daniel, the author from Babylon.
Yeah, and just on that note, right? Like liberal people come with the same kind of preloaded stuff. They're like, well, there are prophecies that appear to come true, so it had to have been written afterwards, and it's probably not Daniel. It's like, well, where are you getting those assumptions from? They sound like a priori commitments to an ideological thing that you want to defend more than an open mind coming to the Bible saying, well, let's see what it was saying for itself. Let the Bible speak for itself on this. And the best means, I think, for testing something there, one of the best means at least, is to check the coherency of it. Like, does this contradict the message of the Bible? If you can wrap your mind around that kind of big M message, I should re-examine it then, right? Because for Christians, if it's Jesus and Jesus is the point and the end, all the stuff that really doesn't seem to fit with who Jesus is, we need to reconsider our interpretations of them, because the whole point's about Jesus if you're a Christian. If not, look at the trajectory of the scriptures in general, like from an academic standpoint. The prophecies are not happy. They're not like, Israel, you're doing so good. Their own history that they record shows how bad they are at following God. And they're the special chosen people. Yeah. Well, good place to end it tonight. I'm going to try to get an email thread going so that we can kind of chat and, dialogue on this stuff in between the weeks. Thanks for staying on this long, you guys, and great discussions. Josh, I really appreciate what you're bringing to the table. Great questions. I'm looking forward to unpacking more of those things.
Oh, thank you. Same here. I love to hear different thoughts and views and think upon them, and I appreciate that you guys are all willing to do that too. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. All right, guys. See you later.
Next time.